Hey, what's going on, everybody? We're going to go ahead and take a look at one of the first writing skills in AP, not just world history, but also US history as well. And that is what is known as the short answer questions. Without further ado, let's go and take a look at what is known as the SAQ. All right. So, first of all, if we're looking at the SAQ itself, it is 3 questions on your AP exam. And They is 20% of your test. And this is one example. Again, note that there are 3 parts, and it's going to ask you to either explain and describe 3 things, or it's going to identify one and explain 2. Okay. If you've taken previous or other AP classes before, this is commonly known as the FRQ, the free response question, or the CRQ. For the sake of world history and US history, this is known as the SAQ. So, again, 3 different parts, and you're asked to do this relatively quickly as well. So, what you need to do is a number of things in a very short amount of time. Okay? And the way that I'm going to have you do it is what I call this acronym IDEA. So, you have these questions. What you want to do are 3 things. One, you want to be able to identify your claim. In other words, just think real quick that says, this is this. Okay. Provide some kind of elaboration or evidence to this. And then finally, address and answer the prompt. Okay. So what might that actually look like in addressing a prompt, and why this method so effective? What it does is that it allows you to take the question, okay, and from there you identify the claim. In other words, answer the question directly. Don't set anything up. Don't set any context. Hey, don't give any fluff. Okay, just tell me this is this. Okay, identify the claim as is with particularly specific factual information. Then what you want to be able to do now is to describe or define that further, demonstrate some kind of historical knowledge. Okay, and then lastly, you want to what we call close the loop. In other words, you want to bring the answer back to the question itself here. Okay, in other words, you're going to have to address now the question as it is written. So connect it back to the prompt. What it tries to seek to answer is how and why does this claim best address the intent of the question. Again, a theme we're going to look at in this class is that historians and teachers generate the questions. And in a lot of ways, they're looking for some answers that for you to be able to produce. Okay. And so they ask this question, you be as direct as possible, demonstrating some sort of historical knowledge and understanding. On the AP exam, you're going to be asked to write within a box. It's about 8 inches by 7.5 inches. And on the exam itself, again, you're going to have to answer 3 question sets. And within those question sets, there are usually 3 parts. And you have about 40 minutes to be able to complete this. So in other words, if you do the math, it's about 13 questions, just a little bit over 13 minutes per set. And you have this amount of space to be able to answer all 3 parts of the question. So we have some recommendations. So what you want to be able to do is to, at the least, answer definitely in order. So if there's a part A, start with part A here, write out your answer. Part B, go and write it out. If you want to skip a line, please go ahead and do so. And then if there's a part C, go ahead and answer it in the space that is provided. But we, again, want to be able to use a particular method so that we are addressing all parts of the prompt. And we're going to use that IDEA acronym in order to be able to do this, as noted from before. You want to be able to identify what you're actually trying to answer, explain and describe it further, and then lastly, to address it back to the prompt. And if you're able to do all these things here, you will score 1 rubric point. It's either going to be a 0 or a 1. So either you get it or you don't. So therefore, it's really important for you to be able to follow this method. Okay. Let's be a little bit more tangible here and take a look at a sample SAQ. Okay, so this is something you may actually get in either world history or US history. So this is a good prompt for us to use. We're just going to focus on one part here, part A, just to make sure we get our bearings here. So this part here, briefly explain one example of how contact between Native Americans and Europeans brought changes to Native American societies in the period 1492 to 1700. Okay. So let's go ahead and provide an answer. Okay? And there are, again, 3 parts you want to take a look at. First of all, be able to, 1, identify your claim. Okay? And by identifying the claim, we mean providing some kind of a historical example or historical claim or some sort of assertion or historical interpretive analysis, but for the most part is give me one tangible piece of evidence. And usually, a lot of times, these are some of the key vocabulary words that we're going to look at in this particular class. So let's answer the prompt here. Okay, there is contact between Native Americans and Europeans, and it brought changes. This verb is important, which we'll get to later on, to Native American societies in this particular period. Okay, so what would be an identified change that comes about here? So the change is that, hey, again, look at this answer here, the spread of contagious European-born diseases. Now, this is a claim that is being made, but it doesn't quite address the prompt. Take a look at the second one. You're answering a verb with a verb. So what change occurred? Well, the population in this case, hey, population was decimated as a result of diseases. So this is probably a better way to put this for the sake of our response. What change was brought? A population change. How does that population change come about? By diseases. Okay, so there's your identification. Okay, so one answer is population change. So again, disease technically is not the answer, it's the population change that came about as a result of diseases. So that's one answer. Then what you want to be able to do now is to provide evidence for that particular claim. In other words, define it, demonstrate some kind of knowledge and understanding of that particular concept that you have just raised up here. And so, yes, it seems obvious that diseases bring some kind of death, but in some cases you get diseases and it's just the effect is minimal. Okay, you want to elaborate on this further. Why? What did it create drastic population change? Why? Because natives did not possess natural immunities to smallpox and influenza, right? So there is an explanation as to why this disease was so awful for Native Americans, such that 90% of Native Americans perished. Again, one of the world's worst tragedies that we see, and it's because of this particular fact. So it's an elaboration on the part that basically says, I say, right? This is what I say. And so therefore, as a result, this supports my particular claim. And then the last part that you want is to be able to answer the prompt as best as you possibly can. Now, you want to come back and bring about this particular part in terms of how contact brought change. So you got to come back. And usually you would bring up a response, an answer, and then from there, reread that question. And if you can find that part in terms of what changes, elaborate on that part further. So in this case, the author wrote, native population losses weakened their defenses, and European conquerors easily subjugated survivors and exploited. So here we go, subjugation. In other words, there's some kind of, the Native Americans became subject to Europeans, and their lands were exploited by colonization. Okay, so subjugation to a certain extent, but particularly the exploitation of lands through colonization is a further elaboration of that particular change. Okay, it's a further description of the change that's being made. It closes the loop. It brings it back. There's a consequence to this, and thus we use the phrase "and so" to kind of get us thinking. So, this is how you want to be able to address a short answer question prompt. And you'll notice that this is just simply a few sentences, 1, 2, 3 sentences at the most in order to answer these questions. You can do this quickly, but you must be thorough in your response. Okay? Now, some short answer questions are just simply, they're asking you to explain, identify, or describe. Sometimes these short answer questions result in some kind of stimuli or some sort of document that you're asked to utilize in order to answer the prompt itself here, whether it's a map, whether it's some data tables, whether it's an image, a political cartoon, a primary or secondary source document, and in some cases, we actually have a historical interpretation. In other words, two historians have a viewpoint on a particular subject, and you're there to interpret and contrast the two of them together. Okay. Now, these are tricky. These make it a little bit more difficult, but I'm going to suggest one thing that may help you to answer these particular questions. Okay, is that when you get a stimulus, what you want to do is to actually write a summary. And I would suggest you do this above where you would answer. Okay, so let's say, for example, you're looking at this particular map right here, okay, whereby you can summarize this and say, all right, origins of agriculture are in these circles here. Okay, here in the Middle East is origins of agricultural societies, and it's spread across time across Afro-Eurasia. Okay, and so you can make a summary of this map and say, look, this is a map okay, uh, about the spread of agriculture in the early human periods. Okay, and so go ahead and I would suggest you summarize it and in the top of your answer box or even somewhere else, write it down. Okay. And what this does is that it differentiates, okay, from your actual response, because this summary right here, okay, cannot be your answer. Okay. This is not the answers to A, B, or C. Okay. Your summary is not your response. So it helps you to differentiate, okay, the two of them together. Okay, so you can do the same thing in terms of political cartoons. If you get a political cartoon, okay, the summary of what this cartoon is about, okay, is very rarely going to be the answer. They're going to ask you, interpret this cartoon. Okay, no, you should be able to look at this political cartoon and say, all right, you have these really wealthy people, okay, and they're being held up by the workers of the world. Okay, that's the summary. There's some commentary in it. Okay, and from there, you can go ahead and address the prompt as is. But this summary itself is never, or almost never, the actual answer to parts A, B, or C. Okay, if you have two historians what you want to be able to do is to go ahead and same thing, summarize one of them, summarize the second one, okay, and then from there you can produce responses and answers, and you can do the exact same thing with any primary source or secondary source document. So the summary helps you to produce evidence and answers, but it is almost never the answer. Okay. Lastly, some general writing guidelines for SAQs. One, be very explicit. Okay. Avoid generalization, some real vague stuff. I'll produce an example at the bottom here. Okay. For most of the work that we do in AP history, I know we do want to quote sources, but in the short writing responses that we do, SAQ, the long essay, and eventually the DBQ essays, hey, you rarely actually want to be able to copy down and quote a particular document, only when it's absolutely necessary. Okay, use active verbs, okay, and an active voice. Okay, things are happening in history. Okay, so utilize those particular verbs. Okay, and lastly, diction and syntax play a major role. Okay, and use this particular example about being really explicit. Okay, oftentimes when we go back to that first SAQ, we get responses like this: Europeans brought diseases to the Americas, and it had an impact on native populations. Right? This here is vague. Okay. And impact, what kind of impact? What was the end result for this here? Instead, contagious European diseases decimated. Okay, take a look at this diction right here. Okay, the word choice that's being utilized, okay, that shows very aptly what happened to native populations. Okay, so with that, that is the SAQ. So you should have a sample at some point, and so give that one a shot. All right, thanks, guys.